Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit the like button. It helps me so much. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can also join my Patreon. We have a fundraiser in progress. I will talk about that at the end of the video. Today I have for you a story about one of the most cold-blooded acts I have come across recently. This is a story about some sort of vengeance. It's a story about hatred, and it's a story about evil. When I first started researching this story, I thought there must be some sort of big motive here. There must be some real desire to get back at these people. Nope, as I often am, I was wrong. One night in a very quiet little town, a monstrous act was committed, leaving a family dead and broken and a community shaken to its core. This is the story of the murder of the Gee family, often called Bloodbath in Beason. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. It is a warm, late summer night in the tiny town of Beason, Illinois. When I say tiny, I mean micro. There have never been more than a couple hundred people living in Beason. As of 2020, there are 147 people there. The demographic page online actually says there is one Hispanic person and one Black person. Everyone else is white. That's how tiny Beason is. They know exactly what everyone's race is, down to the two people who aren't white. It is very, very rural, and it is quite isolated. It's a 50-minute drive to Springfield, which is south of Beason, and a 2.5-hour drive to Chicago, which might as well be a world away. The people of Beason live very quiet, slow-paced lives, and everyone knows everyone. This is the kind of place where people don't lock their doors. They leave their keys in their cars when they go inside the store, and even when their car is parked outside their house. There is very little crime and almost no violent crime. The only time someone dies is when they're old. Well, usually, that is. This is the Gee family. They were a mixed family. Raymond Gee was the father. He went by Rick. His wife was Ruth Constant Gee, and together Raymond and Ruth had two children, Austin Gee and Tabitha Gee. Ruth also had two children from a previous relationship, Dillen and Justina, and then Rick had an adult daughter named Nicole. Rick and Ruth also had a daughter named Jessica, but Jessica has severe disabilities that Rick and Ruth could not provide for. So Jessica was living in the custody of DCFS at the time of the events we're discussing today. The night of September 20th, 2009 was just like any other. People went about their daily tasks and were settling in for the evening. But sometime after the town closed down and people were in their beds sleeping after midnight, a monster crept up to the door of this house and got inside. The quiet night air was soon filled with screaming and the sound of something heavy hitting floors, walls, doors, and people over and over and over. The monster then quietly slipped away into the night. The next morning, 10-year-old Seton Landstrom rode his bike to the Gee home because he wanted to show his new bicycle to his friends, Dillen Constant and Austin Gee, who again were half-brothers. As little Seton came to the Gee house, he saw that there was blood smeared on the porch and on the front door of the house. That front door was also open about 12 inches. Seton peered inside and yelled, "Is anybody home?" He later said, "I kind of stopped for a minute and thought of what to do. I was scared." Even at 10 years old, Seton could feel it. There was death in the air. He knew something was very, very wrong. He jumped back on his bicycle and pedaled to the home of Nicole Gee, who is the adult daughter of Rick Gee that I mentioned a moment ago. Nicole lived on the opposite side of Beason from the Gee family, but that's less than a mile. Nicole would later say that when Seton arrived at her house on his bicycle, he was white as a sheet. Nicole, along with a man named Adam Kohler and his grandfather, Pudge Kohler, were installing carpet at Nicole's house. And when they saw Seton, they all knew something was wrong. Seton's voice was shaking, and he said, "There's something wrong at Dillen's house. You better go down there." Adam and Pudge got into Pudge's pickup truck, and Nicole followed in her own car. Adam and Pudge arrived at the Gee home first. Adam told Pudge to stay in the car while he went inside. As Adam walked up on the porch, he saw the blood and then he saw a large knife. And he thought, well, the Gees raise chickens. Maybe they're just butchering some chickens. Then Adam got closer to the front door. The house was dark inside. The drapes were all shut. The blinds were all shut. And it was very, very quiet. Adam had to feel along the wall for a light switch. When he flipped it on, his heart skipped a beat and he felt weak in the knees. There in the hallway of the small home was the body of Rick Gee lying face down in a pool of blood. He was obviously dead. Adam knew he had to get out of there. He ran back outside and yelled at Pudge to call 911. Nicole was just pulling up as all of this was happening. As the three of them waited for the police, Nicole became upset and begged Pudge to go back inside, which he did. Pudge walked in the house, he saw Rick in the hallway, and then he decided to keep going. Adam soon followed after Pudge, so at this point in time, both men are now in the house. At the end of the hallway, the men saw it, a literal bloodbath. 14-year-old Dillen was laying on his right side, lying in the fetal position, just near the entrance of his parents' bedroom. Ruth Gee, his mother, was in her bedroom about 3 feet from her son, still in her nightgown. 11-year-old Austin was in his bedroom, face down in his underwear. 16-year-old Justina was on her bed, and she was not moving. None of them were. And if this were not all horrible enough, then they found 3-year-old Tabitha lying in a pool of blood at the entrance of her bedroom. Pudge dropped to his knees. Adam had to help him stand, and together they helped each other out of the house. They were in absolute shock as to what they had just witnessed. Minutes later, Logan County Sheriff's Officer Michael Block and Illinois State Trooper Paul Hennessy entered the Gee home with their guns drawn. One by one, they saw the bodies. They stood in silence, horrified at what they were looking at. The family had been beaten to death, one by one, with a heavy and deadly object. They thought the entire family was dead. But then, Officer Block saw movement in the corner of his eye, and he yelled, "Oh shit, Paul, she moved." Little Tabitha had been laying in her own blood for more than 15 hours, but she was still alive. Paul Hennessy rushed to the baby's side and felt her back to see if she was still breathing, and she was. Her little eyes were swollen shut, and she couldn't talk, but she was alive. Paul asked her, "Honey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" And the baby let out a little groan. Even though the officers hadn't thoroughly checked the house, they knew this could not wait. They yelled outside to the paramedics who were just arriving. One of them ran inside and scooped Tabitha up. She was put inside the ambulance and rushed to the hospital. And then cell phones all over town began ringing and ringing and ringing.
Upon arrival at the scene, 5 members of the Raymond Gee family were found deceased in the residence.
A family is killed in a small Illinois town. A toddler survives a brutal homicide scene, and the hunt is on for the killer.
All the bodies have been removed from the residence and transported to Peoria for autopsies, which are occurring today. The cause of death will be determined at the autopsy.
Logan County Sheriff's deputies responded to a 911 call Monday afternoon in Beason, Illinois. When they arrived at the home of Raymond and Ruth Gee, deputies found the couple dead, along with 3 children. In Tuesday's news conference, the sheriff said that a 3-year-old girl survived the attack, but authorities have not released any more details about her.
Leads have been developed and are being vigorously pursued.
Law enforcement officials are trying to identify a suspect. They characterize the crime scene as a brutal homicide and say the suspect is considered to be armed and dangerous.
Within an hour or so, the entire state of Illinois knew there had been a massacre in one of its towns. People gathered together to comfort each other and to talk about what had happened. They were stunned. This was a peaceful place where things like this just did not happen. Immediately, people began to talk about Dillen. Dillen was a very troubled young boy. He had antisocial and violent tendencies, and he also had a very low IQ. At 14, he was failing in almost every class at school, and he acted out both at home and at school. He was constantly in trouble and would often hurt other kids on the playground and in the neighborhood. There were even people who came forward and said that Rick and Ruth had told friends of theirs that something had to be done about Dillen, otherwise he was going to end up killing someone. As people in the area talked, many of them assumed that Dillen had killed his entire family. The problem with that theory, Dillen was dead too. But still, they thought, Perhaps he killed some of the family members, and then his stepfather, Rick, killed him, but not before Dillen could get in some deadly blows. No information had been released, and so people were making up all kinds of theories about what they thought had happened based on what they knew about the family. It was well known that Rick Gee sold drugs. It was also well known that Rick and Ruth were swingers. Had the swinging lifestyle gone too far and a jealous partner come in and killed the whole family because of Rick and Ruth's behavior? Rick and Ruth would bring other partners into their home while the kids were there and have sex in their bedroom with their kids aware of exactly what was going on. Now, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. No one cares what you do in your bedroom. The government shouldn't care. Your church shouldn't care. Nobody should care what you do in your bedroom. But do not engage in sexual conduct in front of your children. And that doesn't mean in front of them without a door. That means while they're in the house and you're being loud. That includes married, straight sex. Exposing children to adult sex lives is child abuse. Period. I said it and I'll say it again. I sit in this chair and talk about horror story after horror story after horror story, and 9 times out of 10, the people committing the horrors have been exposed to something they should not have been exposed to as children. I consider myself a very progressive person, and I am far from a prude, but there is right and there is wrong, and exposing children to adult behavior is wrong. It is abusive behavior and it screws your kids up bad. The other thing it does is it lets the whole town know that you're exposing your kids to things like this. So you get a reputation as not being the best parents. And that reputation rubs off on your kids. And they don't deserve that either. Now, this is starting to feel like victim blaming, even to me. And I'm the one saying it. I am not blaming Rick and Ruth for being murdered. I want to take every opportunity here in these discussions to talk about what screws kids up, because those kids go on to be people I talk about sitting in this chair. Did that happen here? No, it didn't. Are we still going to talk about what sexual behavior and drugs in front of children does? We sure are. Rick and Ruth did drugs in front of their kids. Dillen had stolen drugs from his stepfather. He also stole pornography out of his parents' room, pornography that he should not have had access to. Could this disturbed 14-year-old boy really have committed this unthinkable act? Just what had happened here. Everyone was talking about it. I think part of the reason I'm a little annoyed right now is I feel bad for Dillen. I feel like this was a kid who needed help and didn't get it. And then when he was murdered, everyone automatically assumed it was him. And that makes me feel sorry for him. And it makes me angry at the circumstances he was raised in. Regardless of how anyone is raising their kids, no one deserves to be slaughtered, okay? As the bodies were removed and taken for autopsy, the investigation continued. When the coroner's report was finished, it was worse than anything anyone could have imagined. Rick and Ruth had each been beaten to death with a tire iron. They each received 13 blows, and I've often wondered if that was on purpose, 13 being a superstitious number. In total, for all the victims, 86 blows were delivered to this family. 84 of those were deadly. Little Tabitha was hit twice. She had a fractured skull, and she was put into intensive care. A piece of her skull was removed to allow her brain to swell. She also had a broken arm. Her little arm was broken when she tried to hold it up to shield herself. Oh my God, that makes me feel sick. You have to remember, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter right now. I just can't help but picture. The police began to question everyone in town. The first person they wanted to talk to was Nicole Gee, who was part of the family, but not living with the family. Nicole was devastated. She could not believe what had happened and asked about Tabitha, who was now under round-the-clock guard at the hospital. Nicole was actually told she was not allowed to visit Tabitha as she was being investigated, and that was very difficult for her to hear. The police wanted to talk to everyone that was close to Nicole. Nicole had an ex-husband, this man, Christopher Harris. Nicole and Christopher divorced in 2007, but then continued to have an on-again, off-again relationship. The couple had a 9-year-old daughter, and Nicole had just given birth to the couple's son 8 weeks previous to the murders. So she had a 2-month-old baby, and she just lost her whole family. The police wanted to talk to Christopher Harris, Nicole's ex-husband. The police did speak with Christopher, and he denied having anything to do with what had happened at the house. And then the forensics team found the clue that would break the case wide open. There was a bloody handprint left near Austin's body, and the CSI team was able to get a clear copy of that print. They ran it through their database, and they got a hit.
Good evening, everyone. I am pleased to announce tonight that an arrest has been made in the case involving the murder of 5 members of the Raymond Gee family on September the 21st, 2009. Today, Christopher Harris was arrested at the safety complex and is currently in the Logan County Jail. Christopher J. Harris of McLean County, Illinois, age 30 years old, is being charged with murder. The exact charges will be determined by the Logan County State's Attorney Office and the assistance of the Illinois Attorney General's Office. The arrest is based on the tireless efforts of the investigators and the Illinois State Police Crime Lab forensic analysis of evidence removed from the crime scene. I will not discuss the specifics of the evidence at this time. Additionally, a gray primer colored 1989 Ford Ranger pickup truck under the control of Christopher Harris has been seized. The arrest is not the culmination of this investigation. There are more investigative leads to be followed. We have not determined at this time if more arrests may come. We are confident in the forensic evidence analyzed thus far. The Illinois State Police Crime Lab will continue their examination of numerous exhibits submitted in this case. As you can see, this is not a standalone investigation. This is the culmination of several agencies coming together as one and doing their job.
Nicole Gee's ex-husband, baby daddy, current boyfriend had killed her entire family and tried to kill Tabitha. The police had been talking to people in the area, and they had pieced together a timeline. People in the area were stunned to learn that someone who knew the family so intimately could have killed them all, but this was only the beginning.
An Illinois man is being held without bail in connection with the deaths of several members of his ex-wife's family. Christopher Harris has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Raymond Gee, his wife, and 3 of their children were found dead in their home late last month. That gruesome discovery sent residents of this tiny town into a state of grief and panic.
People just need to take the normal precautions that you would take, the practical measures of at night, lock your door, know where your children are at, and keep track of your neighbors. That's a good thing to do.
Police say the Gees were killed by blunt force trauma after a violent struggle with their attacker. A 3-year-old girl was found alive but seriously injured. Authorities say Harris was divorced several years ago from Nicole Gee. Court records from their 2006 split show the woman accused her husband of verbal and physical abuse. But according to the suspect's stepmother, Harris and Gee had recently gotten back together and were planning to have a second child. Authorities haven't offered any possible motive in last month's killings. If convicted, Harris could face the death penalty.
The police continued to investigate, and about a month after the murders, there were some major developments. Christopher Harris's brother, Jason, was arrested, along with his girlfriend, Jennifer Ernest, who was 24, and her mother, Sarah Duncan, who was 43.
I want to thank everyone for attending this press conference. On October 1st, I announced the arrest of Chris Harris on 5 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder of the Raymond Gee family in Beason, Illinois. I also told you that the investigation was continuing. Early this morning, the Gee Homicide Task Force arrested 3 additional persons involved in this case. Those arrested are Jason L. Harris, 4022 Miller Road, Armington, Illinois, 22 years of age. Jennifer C. Ernest, 4022 Miller Road, Armington, Illinois, 24 years of age. And Sarah A. Duncan, 5541 Rose Hill Road, Sarasota, Florida, 43 years of age. Jason L. Harris is the brother of Chris Harris. Jennifer C. Ernest is the girlfriend of Jason L. Harris. Sarah Duncan is the mother of Jennifer Ernest. Jason Harris Ernest and Sarah Duncan are currently being charged with obstructing justice, a Class 4 felony. Jason Harris and Ernest were arrested at the safety complex. Sarah Duncan was arrested today in Sarasota, Florida. These arrests are based upon subsequent investigative interviews that have occurred since the previous press conference. Again, this investigation will continue until all leads have been exhausted and the analysis of the crime scene evidence is completed by the Illinois State Police Crime Lab.
Word got around that the charges were for obstruction of justice, and people could understand that. Everyone in the area knew that Christopher's family did not want to give information to the police, but the obstruction charges were just for Jason's girlfriend and her mother. Jason was being charged with 5 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, just as his brother had been charged weeks earlier. Jason and Jennifer lived in a home in Armington, a small town of about 350 people. Chris Harris often stayed with his brother and his girlfriend, that is, when he wasn't staying with his ex-wife, Nicole Gee. Once Jason was arrested, he started to talk, and soon the cops had convinced him to flip on his brother Christopher. This is when the police finally got the whole story. Jason told police that on the night of the murders, he and Chris had been drinking. They started talking about Justina, the 16-year-old girl in the Gee home, and they were talking about how they want to have sex with her. These are a couple of real winners we got here, folks. We got ourselves a couple of grade A scumbag losers, and it never ceases to amaze me how these types of guys even get a woman. I really don't understand it. Jason tells police that he and Christopher had been drinking and also doing cocaine. The brothers knew that Rick Gee had a lot of marijuana in the house, and they decided they wanted that too. So the 2 brothers decide they're going to break into the Gee house so Chris could rape Justina, and he knew in order to do that, he was going to have to kill everyone inside. That's it. That's the story. I thought, okay, he's an ex-husband. He must be really, really mad at this family. Maybe his family, caused the divorce. Maybe the family hated him. Maybe the family didn't support the fact that he and Nicole were dating and seeing each other again. Nope, that was the motive for murdering an entire family. He wanted to have sex with the 16-year-old girl. When I say we live among monsters, I mean that literally, and I don't have to tell you guys that, you know. The 2 brothers armed themselves with a tire iron and went to the Gee house in the early morning hours of September 21st. Christopher crept inside and attacked Rick first when he came out of his bedroom into the hallway after hearing the front door open. Jason tells the police that he sat outside listening to Ruth Gee scream as his brother killed her. Jason tells the police that the thuds coming from inside the house were so loud he thought the house was going to come apart. Christopher then went into Austin's room and beat the 11-year-old to death. While Jason was waiting outside of the house, suddenly Dillen, the 14-year-old, dove headfirst out of Justina's bedroom window. Dillen ran to Jason, this is someone he knows, yelling, "Bubba, Bubba," which is Jason's nickname. So this little boy goes running to this piece of shit, and Jason just sits there and doesn't respond. This confuses Dillen, who we know has a low IQ and a lot of issues. For whatever reason, probably to try and help his family, Dillen gets up and runs back inside the house. He could have ran off, he could have ran away, but he didn't. He went back inside the house. A few minutes later, probably while Chris was raping Justina, Dillen came back out of the house and tried to run into the backyard. Then Chris realized he'd gotten out of the house, and he comes out of the house chasing Dillen. Jason is just sitting there watching this whole thing. Chris catches up to Dillen and begins hitting him with the tire iron as Dillen is yelling, "Chris, stop. Chris, stop." It's just sickening. These are people that this kid knew. Chris then goes back inside the house, and Dillen, who is badly beaten, picked himself up off the ground and followed Chris back into the house. Had he stayed down and stayed there, played dead, he might still be alive. But we know this is a kid, like I say, that had learning disabilities. Then Jason watched as his brother came back outside, stood on the porch. Jason said, Chris looked up at the sky and then he turned around and went back in. Sounds like he needed a break from all the murdering. Jason said, I heard sounds like the house was coming apart. Thud, 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 thud. It's mind-blowing. The depravity and the pure evil is, you just can't believe that maybe you're standing in line at Walmart next to somebody like this, you know? With the Harris brothers now in custody, the town became somewhat divided, with people believing the Harrises were guilty and others still believing that Dillen was somehow involved. The tension only grew worse when, shockingly, Nicole Gee announced that she was standing by Chris, telling reporters that she did not believe he would kill her family. Oh, I think she did eventually come around. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. Chris's father and mother, Ed and Debbie Harris, told the press, quote, "We are law-abiding citizens. All we want is the truth. If by some miracle Chris did this and you've got 100% proof in forensics to back that up, then we'll stand by the police department. But if you don't, then we'd expect the police department to work to set Chris free and find the real killers." Understandable. The police were sure they had the real killer, and Chris was going to stand trial. The legal proceedings began, and then it was time for the trial to begin. No one was prepared for what Chris would use as his defense. On the second day of Christopher Harris's trial, the trial in which his brother Jason would be the star witness, the jury was shown the crime scene photos. There were audible gasps and crying as people sat, fixated on the horror in the photos. Pools of blood, Justina dead on her bed, violated and bloody with her head hanging off the edge of the bed. The little ones, it was just all too much. The defense began its argument and people were disgusted when Chris's attorneys began to lay out their defense. The argument? Dillen Constance was the actual killer. That when Christopher Harris arrived at the house, the entire family was already dead and he thought Tabitha was dead as well. Chris was claiming that yes, he had gone to the house and that yes, he had taken a tire iron because he was scared. He also admitted that he had stolen Rick's laptop from the house that night. Chris said he only did what he did because he, quote, walked in on a horror that no one could imagine. Oh, you got that right, you piece of shit. It was definitely a horror that we don't want to imagine. Chris's attorneys told the jury that Chris feels really bad that he didn't see Tabitha lying there, because if he had, he would have gotten her help, and instead she had to lay there for hours in pain, 15 hours to be exact. Sickening that the person that did that could turn around and say something like that, you know? Chris's attorneys said that Dillen Constant was a deeply troubled little boy with a violent background and antisocial personality disorder. The attorney said that there was DNA under Rick Gee's fingernails that could belong to Dillen. The testing wasn't conclusive, but it said it could belong to Dillen. Well, they live in the same house together. That DNA could have come from a lot of places. And remember, it wasn't even conclusive. Chris's attorneys did everything they could to dirty Dillen's name. They told the stories of accounts given to them by Dillen's teachers and school administrators. Dillen slapped kids. He kicked boys in the crotch. He sprayed Lysol in someone's eyes. He took a razor knife to school and used it to slash seats on the bus. DCFS said he'd pulled a knife on Justina and once held his brother Austin's head under the water in the pool until onlookers thought he was going to drown Austin. Really sad that kid was having that much trouble, and really gross that the attorneys would use him to try and get this scumbag off. Then Chris's attorneys began attacking Jason. They said Jason had told 13 different versions of what happened that night. Attorneys brought up Jason's criminal record for minor infractions, where he'd lied under oath saying he had an infant son to get a lesser charge. I guess he got charged with something and he said, well, have a baby at home. So he got less time, but he didn't have a baby at home. You'd think that would be something the courts would look into, you know? Chris's attorneys attacked Jason for the deal he'd made with the prosecutors, but Jason fired back, saying that Chris was in need of some female companionship, and apparently he'd called 2 former girlfriends trying to hook up with them, and when that didn't work, why didn't he go home to Nicole? No, because he's some sort of a beast. So instead, he decided he was just going to take what no woman wanted to give him, and he was going to take it from Justina. Jason was asked why Chris killed the entire family, and he replied, because he didn't want to leave any witnesses. Yeah, because the 3-year-old could really be a witness. This guy killed everyone because he is a low-life piece of trash, and he's a monster. The first responding officers then told their stories. As the 2 men spoke about the gruesome scene, the jurors appeared visibly uncomfortable. Christopher dabbed his eyes, or at least pretended to dab his eyes. Rick Gee's mother, a woman named Judy Stogdell, took the stand to identify all of the bodies from the photos, and she broke down during her testimony. Judy also told the court that after the murders, she spoke with Nicole on the phone, and Nicole said, "Grammy, you're all I've got left now. Drive safe." The trial continued, and the jury heard that Jason Harris was getting a very sweet deal in exchange for his testimony. For concealment of homicide, obstruction of justice, and unlawful delivery of a controlled substance, Jason was getting 20 years with time served, and I don't know how I feel about that. He sat outside while his brother was in a house butchering a family. I don't know how I feel about 20 years. Jason's been in prison since 2009. Chris Harris was found guilty on all counts and convicted of beating to death the 5 members of the Gee family. He was then sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He will never get out of prison, and that's exactly how it should be. I found Christopher Gee Harris on an inmate search. He was born in 1979, so that makes him 45 years old. He is ineligible for parole, and I went through his sentences one after the other, just really sickening to see all of the damage he has done, and then look at that little Weasley smile on his face. Personally, I don't think people that do things like this should be allowed to breathe, let alone smile. But at the same time, I know it costs more to execute him than it does to let him live in prison, and maybe living in prison and being miserable is worse than death. I did not find Jason L. Harris on the inmate search of Illinois prisoners. He got a 20-year sentence in 2009, which means he shouldn't be out yet. 20 years is still 5 years away, but you know people are getting out early all the time, and maybe he's been released. If he has been, I sure hope he's making better choices, and I hope that he's on parole. In July of 2014, at the request of the Gee family, the murder house was burned to the ground. This is what should happen with all locations where multiple people are murdered. I am still aghast and disgusted by the fact that the Haight home in Cedar City, Utah was sold and someone has moved in. Remember Michael Haight, just north of here where I live in St. George, Utah? Killed his whole family, his mother-in-law, and then himself. Well, the family owned that house apparently, and they sold it, and now someone's living in it, and that family has little kids. That house should have been torn down. It's just not right. That's my opinion. Firefighters from the Beason Fire Department set the small house on fire and controlled the flames as it burned. Everyone in Beason was relieved when it was gone. Tabitha went into foster care and underwent counseling. Mercifully, she has no memory of what happened on that horrible night. She was then adopted, and those records are sealed. We don't know where Tabitha is these days as an 18 or 19-year-old. Tabitha, if you do happen to see this, we all hope you're doing well and that your life is happy and full. You didn't deserve what happened to you, and neither did any of your family members, regardless of their life choices. Christopher Harris is an actual monster, a devil, and his brother Jason isn't much better. This story is everyone's worst nightmare. Your home in what you believe to be the safety of your house, and a monster that you know violates that space and takes your life and the lives of all those you love. I've been saying this a lot lately, but I really do hope you religious people are right. I hope there is something after this life. If there is, and I can buy tickets to watch people like Christopher Harris get what's coming to him, I will be the first in line. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button. It helps so much. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can always join my Patreon. We have a fundraiser in progress right now. This is the thumbnail. You can go and watch this video, and it explains everything that we're doing to raise money for cold case DNA testing. I want you to know I appreciate you. I hope you're doing well. I look forward to interacting with you every time I post, and I'm excited that the community is growing. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.